Ambassador Sarah Chun stood before the towering crystalline spires of the Galactic Council chamber, her human heart beating steadily while alien dignitaries whispered in frequencies beyond her range. For 3 centuries, humanity had begged for scraps at this table, mining rights to dead asteroids, permission to settle barren worlds, trade agreements that barely kept Earth's colonies alive. Today, that would change forever. The Zephyrians had made their fatal mistake when they destroyed the human research station at Kepler, 442b, claiming it violated their sacred space. The Altarians had sealed their doom when they enslaved 10,000 human colonists, calling them barely sentient livestock. And the mighty hegemony of Vega had written humanity's declaration of war when their ambassador laughed at humanity's final diplomatic protest. They had forgotten one crucial detail about the species they so casually dismissed. Humans didn't just break rules when pushed too far. They broke everything. As Sarah's hand moved to the neural transmitter that would deliver humanity's response to every corner of the galaxy, she smiled. The aliens thought they knew humans, weak, short-lived, bound by treaties they couldn't enforce. They were about to learn why Earth's children had once turned their own homeworld's deserts into gardens, why they had crawled out of caves to touch the stars, and why the most dangerous phrase in any language was, "Hold my beer," and "Watch this." The age of human diplomacy was over. The age of human defiance had begun. The Galactic Council chamber stretched before Ambassador Sarah Chun like a cathedral of alien arrogance. Massive crystalline pillars supported a dome that showcased the swirling nebulae of the Andromeda Spiral, while representatives from 47 species occupied floating platforms arranged in ascending circles of importance. At the bottom, barely above the polished obsidian floor, sat Earth's delegation, 3 humans in simple black suits, dwarfed by the magnificent beings above them. Sarah had grown accustomed to this humiliation over her 15 years as Earth's representative. The Zephyrians with their gossamer wings and voices like crystal chimes occupied the highest tier, their platform gleaming with precious metals stripped from world humanity wasn't even allowed to survey. The Altarians, 7 feet tall and covered in scales that shifted color with their emotions, commanded the second tier with their vast trade empire built on slave labor. The hegemony of Vega, beings of pure energy housed in mechanical forms, floated in the third tier, their artificial bodies humming with technologies beyond human comprehension. And then there were the humans, always at the bottom, always grateful for whatever scraps fell from the table above. Today felt different, though Sarah couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the weight of the encrypted messages from Earth High Command burning in her neural implant, or the way her aide Marcus kept checking his chronometer with the precision of a man counting down to an execution. Or maybe it was simply that after 300 years of diplomatic humiliation, something inside the human spirit had finally snapped. The session began with Counselor Zethkri of the Zephyrians calling the assembly to order. Her voice carried the musical quality that had charmed diplomats for millennia, even as her words delivered casual cruelty. Today we address the ongoing dispute between the hegemony of Vega and the human settlement at Kepler, 442b. The hegemony has filed a formal complaint regarding human trespassing in sacred vegan space. Sarah stood, her platform rising slightly to indicate her desire to speak. The simple mechanical whir of her elevation device sounded pitiful compared to the silent grace of alien technology. Honor counselors, the research station at Kepler, 442b, was established under the Terran Colonial Expansion Treaty of 2387. We have legal documentation, A sound erupted from the vegan delegation that took Sarah a moment to recognize. Laughter. The artificial beings were laughing at her with synthesized voices that somehow managed to convey perfect contempt. High Regent Mextar of the hegemony spoke, his mechanical form pulsing with amused energy. Legal documentation? From humans? Counselors, surely we have more important matters than entertaining the legal fantasies of a species that barely understands fire. The chamber filled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as alien amusement, a symphony of clicks, harmonics, and electromagnetic pulses that roughly translated to cosmic ridicule. She felt her jaw clench, but forced herself to remain diplomatic. The treaty was signed by representatives of this very council, she continued, her voice steady despite the burning in her chest. Kepler, 442b showed no signs of vegan occupation or claim when our people arrived. Sacred space need not be occupied to be sacred, intoned Counselor Veltar of Altair, her scales rippling from deep blue to contemptuous gold. Though I suppose a species that defile its own homeworld cannot comprehend the concept of reverence. Sarah's aide, Marcus, shifted beside her. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. Marcus had lost his daughter in the Altarian slave raids on Proxima Centauri. He had volunteered for this diplomatic mission not out of any love for peaceful resolution, but because someone needed to look these beings in their alien eyes and remember every insult for the reckoning that would surely come. Our research station was destroyed without warning, Sarah pressed on. 47 human scientists were killed. Their only crime was trying to understand the cosmic microwave background radiation patterns in that sector. Their research could have benefited all species represented here. This time it was Counselor Veltar who laughed, a sound like glass breaking in harmony. Benefited? Counselors, the Altarian Science Directorate analyzed the human so-called research. They were studying radiation patterns that have been common knowledge to civilized species for over 10,000 years. It would be like congratulating a child for discovering that fire is hot. The alien amusement grew louder. Sarah felt something cold and terrible settling in her stomach, but she pushed forward. This was diplomacy. This was how civilized species resolve their differences. Nevertheless, she said, the destruction of our station violated the Non-Aggression Pact of 2341. We demand reparations and assurance that such attacks will not be repeated. High Regent Mextar's mechanical form shimmered with what Sarah had learned to recognize as condescension. Demand? Humans do not demand anything in this chamber. You petition. You request. You beg, if necessary, though your begging grows tiresome. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure. Behind her, she heard Marcus's breathing become shallow and controlled. She knew that breathing pattern. She had heard it in the gym when Marcus practiced combat scenarios with the intensity of a man preparing for war. Very well, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a more formal register. The United Earth government formally petitions this council for justice regarding the unprovoked attack on our research station at Kepler, 442b. Counselor Zethkree's crystalline form chimed with apparent delight. How refreshing to hear proper protocol from the human delegation. Unfortunately, the hegemony of Vega's claim of sacred space predates human arrival in the Kepler system by approximately 8,000 years. While we sympathize with your loss, ignorance of galactic law is not a defense. What law? Sarah's control cracked slightly. We were given no notice of any sacred sites. The system appeared on no registry of protected areas. How are we supposed to know? By asking, said Veltar, her scales now shifting to deep purple with satisfaction. though perhaps human arrogance prevented such basic courtesy. Sarah felt the last threads of diplomatic restraint beginning to fray. We did ask. We submitted 17 separate requests for system surveys before establishing any presence at Kepler 442b. Every request was denied or ignored. Ignored. Mexstar's artificial voice carried perfect synthetic outrage. Counselors, the hegemony responds to all legitimate communications. Perhaps the humans' primitive technology prevented proper reception of our responses. Sarah reached into her jacket and withdrew a small data pad, her movements careful and deliberate. I have here the communication logs from our diplomatic mission spanning the past 5 years. 43 unanswered requests for information. 19 requests for trade negotiations that received no response. 7 formal complaints about Altarian raids on human settlements that were filed and apparently never reviewed. She looked up at the assembled aliens, and for the first time in her diplomatic career, she allowed her anger to show in her voice. The only communications we receive with any regularity are demands for tribute. Threats about trespassing in space we were previously told was unclaimed, and notifications about new restrictions on human expansion that somehow always seem to benefit existing council members. The chamber fell silent. Sarah realized she had crossed a line, but found she didn't care. 15 years of humiliation, hundreds of dead colonists, and a species relegated to the scraps of the galaxy, while aliens who had never struggled for anything treated humans like a barely tolerated pest. Counselor Zethkree's voice carried a new edge, like crystal beginning to crack under pressure. Ambassador Chun, your tone is approaching the boundaries of diplomatic propriety. Is it? Sarah looked around the chamber, at the floating platforms arranged in their perfect hierarchy of contempt. Forgive me, honored counselors. In human culture, we have a saying about propriety. It's considered impolite to mock the dead. The silence deepened. Several alien delegates began communicating in frequencies beyond human perception, their discussions creating an almost subliminal buzz of agitation. High Regent Mexstar's mechanical form pulsed with irritation. The humans killed at Kepler 442b died because they ignored clearly established boundaries. The hegemony feels no responsibility for the consequences of human recklessness. Clearly established boundaries? Sarah's voice rose despite her training. The first we heard of any vegan claim to that system was when your warships opened fire on a research station filled with civilians. Civilians studying weapons technology, Veltar interjected smoothly. Studying background radiation. The same technology used in your species' crude attempts at energy weapons. Yes. Sarah stared at the Altarian delegate, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. You're saying that because cosmic radiation can theoretically be weaponized, any human who studies it is a legitimate military target? We are saying, Counselor Zethkree chimed in with musical authority, that a species with humanity's documented history of violence must expect heightened scrutiny regarding its activities. Our history of violence. Sarah laughed, and the sound carried no humor whatsoever. Counselors, might I remind this assembly of the Altarian conquest of the Tau Ceti colonies? 60 million sentient beings enslaved or killed. The Zephyrian purge of the Triangulum trade routes, which left entire species extinct. The hegemony's casual annihilation of any civilization that develops faster than light travel without permission. The alien delegates stirred uneasily. These were not topics typically discussed in council chambers, where the focus remained on human shortcomings and the generous patience of their betters. Those were matters of galactic security Mextar said, his mechanical voice carrying programmed certainty. The species in question posed legitimate threats to galactic stability, and 47 human scientists studying radiation patterns posed what kind of threat? Exactly. The threat of human expansion beyond acceptable parameters. The words hung in the air like a confession. Sarah felt her diplomatic training warring with something much older and more dangerous rising from the depths of human DNA. She looked at Marcus, saw the same cold fire burning in his eyes that she felt growing in her own chest. Acceptable parameters, she repeated softly. I see. And who determines these parameters? Honored counselors. Those species with the wisdom and experience to guide galactic civilization. Zethkri replied, her crystalline form radiating serene authority. Humanity is still quite young by galactic standards. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when your people have learned proper restraint and developed more sophisticated technology, you might petition for expanded territorial rights. 1,000 years. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering this generous offer. And, in the meantime, we should be content with the 17 worlds we're currently allowed to inhabit. The ones without valuable resources, strategic importance, or particularly nice weather. Precisely, Veltar said, her scales shifting to approving green. The Council's patience with human ambition has been remarkably generous, considering your species' relative primitiveness. Sarah reached into her jacket again, this time withdrawing a small device that looked like a standard diplomatic communicator. Marcus tensed beside her, his hand moving unconsciously toward the concealed weapon that diplomatic immunity allowed him to carry. Primitiveness, Sarah mused, turning the device over in her hands. You know, honor counselors, there's another human saying you might find interesting. We have a tendency to underestimate our own capabilities right up until the moment we don't. She pressed a button on the device. A soft chime indicated that a message was being transmitted on emergency diplomatic frequencies to every embassy, every ship, every human settlement within range of the Galactic Communication Network. Ambassador Chun. Counselor Zethkri's voice carried warning now. What was the nature of that transmission? Sarah smiled, and, for the first time since entering the council chamber, she felt genuine pleasure. I have just informed Earth High Command that diplomatic solutions to our current disputes appear to be exhausted. The chamber erupted in alien voices, a chaos of frequencies and electromagnetic pulses that roughly translated to confusion and alarm. Sarah continued speaking over the noise, her voice carrying the kind of calm certainty that humans typically reserved for moments of absolute crisis. For 3 centuries, we have abided by every treaty, followed every protocol, and accepted every humiliation because we believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. We built research stations instead of battleships. We sent diplomats instead of armies. We chose to study the universe rather than conquer it. High Regent Mextar's artificial form blazed with indignation. Human, you forget yourself. This council has shown remarkable patience with your species' shortcomings. Without our guidance, humanity would have destroyed itself centuries ago. Would we? Sarah's smile widened, taking on an edge that made several alien delegates shrink back instinctively. That's an interesting theory, Regent Mextar. Perhaps we should test it. She pressed another button on her device, and this time the chime was different, longer, more complex, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the chamber's crystalline structure. Counselor Zethkri's form flickered with what Sarah recognized as fear. That transmission pattern, what have you done? I have just transmitted humanity's formal withdrawal from every treaty, pact, and agreement that binds our species to the authority of this council. As of this moment, Earth and all human settlements consider themselves free agents in galactic affairs. The chamber fell deadly silent. Even the constant hum of alien technology seemed to pause as the implications of Sarah's words settled over the assembled delegates. Veltar was the first to recover, her scales cycling through a rainbow of emotions before settling on angry red. Impossible. The Terran Accession Treaty cannot be unilaterally revoked. It requires council approval. Actually, Sarah said conversationally, if you review Article 7 of that treaty, you'll find that any signatory species can withdraw if they determine that the other parties have acted in bad faith. The destruction of our research station, the enslavement of our colonists, and the systematic denial of our legitimate territorial requests constitute a pretty clear pattern of bad faith. Marcus stepped forward, his diplomatic demeanor falling away, to reveal something that made hardened alien warriors instinctively assess him as a threat. Moreover, Ambassador, perhaps it's time these counselors learned what human legal scholars have known for decades. And what would that be? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Every treaty humanity has signed with the Galactic Council contains clauses that were deliberately mistranslated to favor non-human interests. The Zephyrians' trade agreements actually classify humans as livestock. The Altarian non-aggression pacts specifically exclude protection for primitive species. And the Vegan Territorial Accords explicitly state that human expansion beyond the core worlds constitutes an act of war. The silence in the chamber was now absolute. Sarah could see alien delegates frantically accessing their own legal databases, their comfortable assumptions about human ignorance crumbling in real time. "You knew," she said softly, looking up at the floating platforms that had seemed so mighty moments before. "You all knew that you had trapped us in agreements we couldn't understand, written in languages we couldn't properly translate, with terms that guaranteed our permanent subjugation." Counselor Zethkree's crystalline form dimmed noticeably. The treaties were written in standard galactic legal format. If human translators lacked the sophistication to detect that you had redefined basic terms like citizen and species rights in ways that excluded us entirely, yes, our translators missed that. It took our best legal minds and AI systems 30 years to decode the full extent of your deception. Sarah looked around the chamber one final time, memorizing the faces and forms of beings who had considered themselves her species masters. So here we are, honored counselors. The humans are no longer bound by your laws, your territories, or your authority. We're free to explore, settle, trade, and defend ourselves as we see fit. High Regent Mechstar's mechanical form was pulsing with barely contained rage. You cannot simply declare independence from galactic civilization. The consequences will be our responsibility to face, Sarah finished, as they always should have been. She turned to Marcus, who had retrieved a small data chip from his diplomatic pouch. The chip contained detailed intelligence on every military asset, every territorial weakness, and every internal conflict that human agents had cataloged during 3 centuries of supposedly peaceful observation. "Marcus, please transmit the final package to Fleet Command." "With pleasure, Ambassador." His finger hovered over the transmission key. "For Kepler, 442b. For Proxima Centauri. For every human who died believing that diplomacy would save us." He pressed the button, and across the galaxy, human colony ships that had been disguised as mining vessels suddenly revealed their true purpose. Research stations that aliens had mocked for their primitive technology activated weapon systems that shouldn't have existed. And on distant worlds where humans had been content to scratch out livings on marginal land, hidden facilities began producing warships with capabilities that would have terrified the Council if they had bothered to pay attention. The age of human compliance was over. The age of consequences had begun. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of the ECS Retribution, watching holographic displays that showed the most ambitious military operation in human history unfolding across 17 star systems simultaneously. The ship itself was a testament to 3 centuries of careful deception. Officially classified as a deep space research vessel, it packed enough firepower to level a moon and carried stealth technology that made it invisible to every sensor system the aliens had shared with their human allies. The irony wasn't lost on her that they'd built humanity's first true war fleet using plans stolen from the very species that had insisted humans were too primitive for advanced technology. "Admiral, all strike groups report ready," announced Commander Torres from the communications console. His voice carried the same controlled tension that filled every human officer aboard every ship in the fleet. They had trained for this moment for decades, but training was very different from declaring war on a galactic civilization that considered itself invincible. Elena nodded, her eyes moving across the tactical display that showed the positions of human forces throughout their target zones. The Altarians had made their fatal error when they'd enslaved the colonists at Proxima Centauri. Not only had they provided humanity with the motivation for this war, but they'd given human intelligence services access to detailed information about alien military capabilities through the testimonies of escaped slaves who had served aboard Altarian vessels. "Tactical assessment, Commander Chun?" Elena asked, turning to her chief tactical officer, coincidentally the nephew of Ambassador Sarachin, whose diplomatic bombshell had provided the perfect cover for this operation. "All targets confirmed, Admiral. The Altarian slave processing facility at Rigel 7, the Zephyrian military shipyard at Vega Prime, and the hegemony listening post at Wolf 359. Our intelligence indicates minimal defensive capabilities at all 3 locations. The aliens have grown complacent." Elena smiled grimly. Complacent was exactly the right word. For 300 years, the various species of the Galactic Council had treated humans as a minor nuisance, barely worth monitoring. They had established military installations throughout human space without bothering to defend them, confident that their primitive human neighbors posed no threat whatsoever. Today, they would learn the first lesson in human military doctrine: never underestimate a species that evolved by hunting mammoths with pointed sticks. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Morrison from the sensor station, "we're receiving priority transmissions from all human settlements. The recall codes have been activated." Elena felt a moment of savage satisfaction. The recall codes were perhaps the most audacious part of humanity's preparation for this war. Every human who had been taken by alien slave raids, every primitive laborer working in alien facilities, every domestic servant in alien households, they had all been systematically contacted and prepared for this moment. When the codes went out, every human in alien space would simultaneously transform from victim to saboteur. "Excellent. Signal all strike groups. Operation Prometheus is a go. Target priority remains intelligence gathering first, infrastructure destruction second, and alien casualties only as necessary for mission completion." "Understood, Admiral. Though I should point out that the Altarians at Rigel 7 won't be expecting mercy after what they did to our people." Elena's jaw tightened. The testimonies from the Proxima Centauri survivors had made for difficult reading. Altarian reconditioning programs designed to break human will, genetic experiments to improve human stamina for manual labor, and recreational hunting of humans who had outlived their usefulness. The military tribunal had classified the evidence as too disturbing for general distribution, but every officer in the fleet had read the reports. Our people deserve justice, Commander Chun, but we're not the Altarians. We don't become monsters to fight monsters. Yes, ma'am. Strike Group Alpha reports approaching the Rigel system now. Elena walked over to the main display, where a real-time image showed the ECS Vengeance dropping out of hyperspace near Rigel 7. The ship was one of humanity's new generation of stealth destroyers, designed using technology reverse-engineered from captured alien vessels and improved with innovations that only humans seemed capable of developing. The aliens had never understood that humanity's apparent technological backwardness wasn't due to lack of intelligence, but rather to a different approach to problem solving. Where alien races had developed elegant, standardized solutions to engineering challenges, humans had developed dozens of crude, innovative workarounds. Their ships were slower and less efficient than alien vessels, but they were also more adaptable, more resilient, and far more unpredictable in combat. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from Strike Group Alpha. They've achieved tactical surprise at Rigel 7. The Altarian facility is attempting to surrender. Elena Fronad. Surrender was not part of the tactical plan, primarily because human intelligence had suggested that Altarians would fight to the death rather than face the shame of capture. The species had a rigid honor code that supposedly prevented such displays of weakness. Put me through to Captain Rodriguez. The main display shifted to show the bridge of the Vengeance, where Captain Maria Rodriguez stood surrounded by displays showing the Altarian facility. Elena could see Altarian ships broadcasting surrender codes while their massive processing facility powered down its defensive systems. Captain, report. Admiral, it appears that our intelligence was incomplete regarding Altarian military doctrine. As soon as we decloaked and demonstrated our capability to penetrate their shields, they immediately began surrender protocols. They're requesting safe passage for non-combatant personnel and offering to provide complete intelligence regarding their slave operations in exchange for their lives. Elena felt a moment of disorientation. Human military planners had spent decades preparing for fierce alien resistance, modeling their strategies on the assumption that every species in the Galactic Council possessed the same warrior mentality that had driven humanity to fight its way to the stars. The possibility that their enemies might simply give up when faced with a real threat had never seriously been considered. Admiral, Commander Torres called out from the communication station, we're receiving similar reports from strike groups Beta and Gamma. The Zephyrian shipyard is requesting immediate ceasefire, and the Hegemony listening post is broadcasting what appears to be a plea for mercy in 17 different languages. Elena stared at the tactical display, trying to process what she was seeing. 3 centuries of oppression, thousands of dead humans, entire colonies enslaved, and the perpetrators were surrendering at the first sign of effective resistance. Commander Chun, analysis? Her tactical officer looked equally bewildered. Admiral, it appears that the Galactic Council species have never actually fought a war against an opponent capable of meaningful retaliation. Their entire military doctrine seems to be based on overwhelming superiority against primitive enemies. When faced with an adversary that can actually fight back, they default to surrender protocols. Elena felt a cold realization settling in her stomach. Are you telling me that the species that have been treating humanity like children for 3 centuries are actually cowards? It's worse than that, Admiral. I'm reviewing the intelligence data from the surrendering facilities, and it appears that none of these installations are actually military targets. The Altarian facility at Rigel 7 is primarily administrative, it processes paperwork for slave operations. The Zephyrian shipyard builds civilian vessels. The Hegemony listening post is designed to monitor communication traffic, not direct military operations. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the careful architecture of human vengeance beginning to crumble around her. You're saying we just declared war on the galactic equivalent of bureaucrats and accountants? It appears that way, Admiral. The actual military assets of the Galactic Council species are located much deeper in their territorial space, protected by automated defense systems that were designed to prevent exactly this kind of surprise attack. Elena opened her eyes and looked around the command center, seeing her own confusion reflected in the faces of her officers. Human military doctrine was built on the assumption that their enemies would be formidable opponents worthy of respect, even in war. The possibility that the Galactic Council was populated entirely by species that had grown soft through millennia of unchallenged dominance had never been seriously considered. Admiral, Commander Torres announced, priority transmission from Earth High Command. The main display shifted to show the familiar face of General Harrison, the architect of humanity's military preparations and Elena's mentor for the past 20 years. He looked older than she remembered, his expression grave as he spoke from the secured command bunker beneath the lunar surface. Elena, I assume you're seeing the same intelligence we're receiving here. The initial phase of Operation Prometheus has succeeded beyond our wildest projections, but we're facing an unexpected problem. The aliens are surrendering too easily. Worse, they're asking for human protection. Admiral, we've just received formal requests from 17 different species asking Earth to guarantee their security against what they're calling other primitive upstart civilizations that might follow humanity's example. Elena felt her worldview shifting again. General, are you telling me that the Galactic Council isn't actually a military alliance? That they've been maintaining their dominance through intimidation rather than actual strength? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Elena, the Zephyrians have been the dominant military force in this region of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Do you know how many actual wars they fought in that time? I'm afraid to ask. 3, all against species that had just discovered fire. Their entire military consists of patrol vessels designed to intimidate primitive civilizations and orbital bombardment platforms for destroying any world that shows signs of developing dangerous technology. Elena sank into her command chair, trying to process the implications. So, when they destroyed the research station at Kepler 442b, they used the equivalent of a police cruiser with mining lasers. Elena, the hegemony of Vega's most advanced warship, would lose a fair fight to one of our destroyers. The Altarian's entire fleet is designed for transporting slaves, not engaging in space combat. The command center fell silent as Elena's officers absorbed this information. 3 centuries of human frustration, decades of military preparation, and the most ambitious war plan in human history, all directed at enemies who were apparently less dangerous than Earth's own colonial militia. Admiral, Lieutenant Morrison called out hesitantly, if the Galactic Council species are this weak, how do they maintain their dominance for so long? Elena looked at the young officer, seeing her own confusion reflected in his eyes. Commander Chun, pull up the intelligence files on galactic history. Focus on any species that challenged Council authority in the past 1,000 years. Her tactical officer's fingers danced across his console, calling up historical data that human scholars had painstakingly assembled over centuries of diplomatic contact. The information that appeared on the main display painted a disturbing picture of systematic genocide, disguised as galactic peacekeeping. Admiral, it appears that the Council's standard response to any challenging civilization is immediate orbital bombardment, followed by complete sterilization of the species' homeworld. They don't fight wars, they conduct executions. Elena felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. They never expected humanity to actually fight back, because every other species that tried was extinct within hours of making the attempt. Correct. The Council's entire power structure is based on the assumption that any species advanced enough to threaten them would also be civilized enough to accept diplomatic solutions. They've never encountered a species like humanity, one that's willing to prepare for war while maintaining the pretense of peaceful coexistence. Elena stood up, her mind already racing ahead to the implications of this revelation. If the Galactic Council was actually a collection of weak, decadent species maintained in power only by their willingness to commit instant genocide against any challenger, then humanity's careful military preparations were not just unnecessary. They were potentially catastrophic. Admiral, Commander Torres announced. Incoming transmission from Ambassador Sarah Chun at the Galactic Council chamber. Elena nodded, and the main display showed her aunt's face. Sarah looked exhausted but grimly satisfied as she spoke for what appeared to be a secure location outside the council chamber. Elena, I hope you're monitoring galactic communication networks. The council species are in complete panic. 3 of them have formally requested asylum on Earth, and the Zephyrian High Command is asking for an immediate ceasefire in exchange for territorial concessions that amount to half the galaxy. Aunt Sarah, we're seeing the same thing from our end. The question is, what do we do now? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. That depends on what kind of species we want to be, Elena. We have the opportunity to become the new dominant power in this region of the galaxy, but only if we're willing to use the same methods that kept the Council in power. The threat of immediate, overwhelming retaliation against anyone who challenges us. Elena looked around her command center, at officers who had trained their entire careers to defend humanity against superior alien forces, only to discover that their enemies were nothing more than elaborate paper tigers with the capability and willingness to destroy entire worlds from safe distance. Alternatively, Sarah continued, we could try to build something new, a galactic community based on actual cooperation rather than fear. But that would require us to guarantee the security of species that have spent centuries treating us like livestock. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of human history and human potential pressing down on her shoulders. The easy path was obvious. Take advantage of alien weakness to establish human hegemony, using fear and the threat of orbital bombardment to maintain order just as the Council had done for millennia. The harder path would require humanity to become something unprecedented in galactic history, a dominant species that chose cooperation over conquest, protection over predation. Admiral, Commander Chin said quietly, Strike Group Alpha is requesting orders. The Altarian facility at Rigel 7 is offering to release all human slaves immediately and provide full reparation for damages caused by their slave operations. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the tactical display, where human warships held 3 alien facilities at their mercy while their crews waited for orders that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Signal all strike groups, accept the surrenders, and begin collecting intelligence. Priority focus on identifying any other species that might pose a genuine threat to human interests. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we decide what we're going to become. Yes, ma'am. And the alien requests for protection. Elena looked at her aunt's image on the main display, seeing centuries of human suffering reflected in Sarah's eyes alongside the glimmer of something that might have been hope. Tell them we'll consider their requests. But First, they're going to answer some questions about exactly how many species they've murdered to maintain their little empire. The command center buzzed with activity as Elena's orders were transmitted across human space. In a few hours, humanity would know exactly what kind of galaxy they had inherited. The question that remained was what they would choose to do with that knowledge. Outside the viewports of the Retribution, stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations beyond counting continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the momentous decisions being made by the latest species to reach for dominion among them. Dr. James Mitchell had spent 30 years studying xenoarchaeology, but nothing in his academic career had prepared him for what he was seeing in the data streams flooding in from captured alien facilities. As Earth's leading expert on galactic history, he had been summoned to the Lunar Command Center to analyze intelligence gathered during the first phase of Operation Prometheus. What he found in the alien archives made him question everything he thought he knew about civilization itself. "General Harrison, you need to see this," he said, his voice hollow with shock as he looked up from his analysis station. The command center buzzed with activity around him, but James felt isolated by the weight of what he had discovered in the Altarian database from Rigel 7. General Harrison approached, his weathered face creased with concern. The past 72 hours had aged him visibly as reports continued to arrive from human forces throughout the galaxy, each one painting a more disturbing picture of the reality behind Galactic Council authority. "What have you found, Doctor?" James gestured to his display, where holographic representations of star maps showed the expansion and contraction of various civilizations over the past 50,000 years. "General, the Council species didn't lie about maintaining galactic peace for millennia. They just neglected to mention how they achieved it." The star map shifted, showing red markers indicating the locations of extinct civilizations. There were thousands of them, scattered throughout the galaxy like graves in a cosmic cemetery. Every red marker represents a species that was completely sterilized by Council forces. Not conquered, not subjugated, completely eradicated down to the last microorganism. The Zephyrians alone have destroyed over 400 civilizations in the past 10,000 years. General Harrison's expression darkened as he studied the display. What was their criteria for destruction? Any sign of technological advancement beyond approved parameters? Any attempt to expand beyond their homeworld system? Any development of weapons technology that could theoretically threaten Council interests? Any organized resistance to Council authority? James's hands shook slightly as he manipulated the controls, zooming in on specific sectors. "General, they destroyed entire species for inventing nuclear power. They sterilized civilizations whose only crime was developing faster-than-light communication." The implications hit Harrison immediately. If humanity had developed FTL travel before making contact with the Council, we would have been destroyed within hours of our first interstellar transmission. The only reason humanity survived first contact was because the Zephyrians detected our radio signals before we developed anything they considered truly dangerous. Harrison stared at the display, watching as the computer simulation showed the systematic extinction of species after species. Each one eliminated the moment they showed potential to challenge Council dominance. "How many civilizations have they destroyed, Doctor?" James called up a summary chart that made both men step back in horror. In the past 50,000 years, over 12,000 confirmed extinctions. That's not counting civilizations that may have been destroyed so completely that no record survived, or species that were eliminated before they could develop detectable technology. 12,000, Harrison repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. They've committed genocide against 12,000 species to maintain their power. It gets worse, General. I've been analyzing the decision trees that the Council uses to determine which species represent threats. Do you know what the primary factor is? Harrison waited, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Innovation rate. Any species that develops new technology faster than the established galactic norm is automatically classified as a potential threat. The Council has been systematically eliminating the most creative and inventive species in the galaxy for tens of thousands of years. The full horror of this revelation settled over Harrison like a weight. The Galactic Council hadn't just been maintaining peace through fear. They had been conducting the largest eugenics program in galactic history, breeding out intelligence and creativity through systematic murder. Doctor, what does this mean for humanity? James brought up a new display showing human technological development over the past 3 centuries. The curve was so steep, it almost looked like a vertical line compared to the gentle technological progression that the Council considered acceptable. General, by Council standards, humanity should have been destroyed the moment we invented the computer. Our rate of technological advancement is approximately 50 times faster than what they consider safe. We represent everything they've spent millennia trying to eliminate from a galaxy. Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. Then, why are we still alive? Because we were too primitive when they first made contact, and by the time they realized how quickly we were advancing, we had already integrated enough into galactic society that destroying us would have been inconvenient. The treaties they forced us to sign weren't just about controlling our expansion. They were about slowing our technological development to manageable levels. James pulled up a series of diplomatic documents that showed the careful way Council species had steered human research away from dangerous areas. Restrictions on energy research that prevented development of advanced weapons. Trade agreements that made humans dependent on alien technology instead of developing their own. Educational exchanges that subtly discouraged human innovation in favor of copying existing alien solutions. They've been conducting a soft genocide against us for 3 centuries, General. Not killing us outright, but slowly breeding the creativity and innovation out of our species through cultural manipulation. Harrison's hands clenched into fists as he absorbed this information. Every diplomatic humiliation, every technological restriction, every treaty that had seemed designed to keep humanity in its place. All of it had been part of a systematic campaign to prevent humans from becoming what they were naturally evolving into, the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever seen. Doctor, I need you to analyze something else for me. Our recent military operations showed that the Council species are much weaker than we expected. How is that possible if they've been successfully maintaining galactic dominance for so long? James had been wondering the same thing, and his analysis had led him to a conclusion that was almost as disturbing as the genocide data. General, they've been selecting for weakness in themselves as much as they've been selecting against strength in others. Look at this. The display showed the technological development curves for all major Council species over the past 10,000 years. Unlike humanity's explosive growth, the alien curves were almost flat, showing minimal advancement over millennia. They've created a galactic civilization where innovation is literally illegal. For tens of thousands of years, they've been destroying any species that showed significant creativity or technological advancement. The result is that they've eliminated most of their own evolutionary pressure to improve. Harrison studied the charts with growing amazement. You're saying they've made themselves weak by making the galaxy safe. Exactly. They've created a perfect ecological niche for themselves by eliminating all predators and competitors, but in doing so, they've lost the ability to adapt or evolve. They're like house cats who've forgotten how to hunt because all the mice have been eliminated. A new voice interrupted their conversation as Admiral Vasquez's image appeared on the communication screen. She was speaking from the bridge of the Retribution, and Elena looked as shaken as Harrison felt. "General, we've just received a priority transmission from the hegemony of Vega. They're offering to surrender their entire military to human control in exchange for protection against what they're calling the Andromedans." Harrison frowned. The Andromedans? A species from the Andromeda Galaxy that apparently invaded our galaxy about 2,000 years ago. The hegemony claims they've been fighting a covert war against them ever since, and they're requesting human assistance because our unpredictable tactical innovations might be effective against an enemy that their own forces can't defeat. James felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "General, I need to check something." He began calling up star charts, showing the locations of destroyed civilizations, cross-referencing them with temporal data about when each extinction occurred. What he found made him curse softly in 3 languages. "General, Admiral, look at this. The pattern of civilizations destroyed by the Council over the past 2,000 years, it's not random. They've been systematically eliminating any species located along potential invasion routes from Andromeda." The display showed a clear corridor of dead civilizations stretching from the rim of the galaxy toward the galactic core, like a highway paved with graves. "They haven't been maintaining galactic peace," James continued, his voice growing more horrified with each word. "They've been scorching the Earth ahead of an invasion they couldn't stop. Every species they've destroyed was positioned where they could have served as a buffer against Andromedan expansion." Admiral Vasquez's voice carried a new note of urgency. "Doctor, are you saying that the Council has been committing genocide as a defensive strategy?" "Worse than that. I think they've been sacrificing entire civilizations to buy themselves time to prepare for a war they don't know how to fight. And now they're asking humanity to do what 12,000 extinct species couldn't: stop an invasion that the Council has been running from for 2 millennia. Harrison felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as the full scope of the situation became clear. Humanity hadn't just declared independence from a collection of weak alien bureaucrats. They had inherited responsibility for defending a galaxy that had been systematically weakened by its previous protectors. "Admiral, what's the current status of our forces?" "All strike groups report successful mission completion, General. We've captured or destroyed every target on our initial list, and we're receiving surrender offers from Council forces throughout human space. But, General, we're also detecting movement in the outer rim sectors. Something big is coming in from the direction of Andromeda, and it's not broadcasting any identification signals." James pulled up long-range sensor data that had been collected from the captured alien facilities. What he saw made his blood run cold. "General, Admiral, the Andromedans aren't coming. They're already here. Look at this sensor data from the Zephyrian listening posts. These signatures match ships that have been operating in our galaxy for at least 50 years, maybe longer." The display showed the ghostly traces of massive vessels moving through empty space between star systems, following paths that avoided all known civilizations while systematically mapping galactic defenses. They've been conducting reconnaissance for decades, and the Council has been too afraid to engage them directly. Instead, they've been destroying any species that might have been able to help fight them. Admiral Vasquez's image flickered as she transmitted from an increasingly unstable communication channel. "General, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching the Sol system. Multiple contacts, moving at speeds that should be impossible according to our understanding of physics. Harrison looked at James, seeing his own realization reflected in the scientist's eyes. Humanity had spent 3 centuries preparing to fight the Galactic Council, only to discover that the real enemy was something far more dangerous, and they were about to face it alone in a galaxy that had been deliberately weakened to prevent exactly this kind of resistance. Admiral, recall all human forces to defensive positions around Earth and the core colonies. Dr. Mitchell, I need you to analyze everything we've captured about Andromedan capabilities. We need to understand what we're facing. General, James said quietly, based on the Council's behavior patterns, I think the Andromedans represent everything that the Council has been trying to prevent any galactic species from becoming. They're what humanity might have evolved into if we hadn't been controlled and restricted. Harrison felt a moment of grim satisfaction despite the approaching crisis. Then, perhaps it's time for the galaxy to see what happens when an unrestricted human civilization meets its evolutionary cousins. Outside the Lunar Command Center, Earth's defensive platforms powered up for the first time in 3 centuries, while human fleets raced back from their scattered positions throughout the galaxy. Humanity was about to face its greatest test, not against the weak and decadent species that had oppressed them for generations, but against something that might be as innovative and dangerous as humans themselves. The galaxy held its breath as 2 species that had never learned to accept limits prepared to determine which of them would inherit the stars. Captain Sarah Kim had never expected to die defending the same space that the Galactic Council had insisted was too dangerous for human colonization. But as she watched the Andromedan fleet emerge from hyperspace like a swarm of metallic locusts, she realized that her ancestors' dreams of touching the stars had led to this moment of cosmic reckoning. The bridge of the ECS Defiance hummed with activity as her crew prepared for humanity's first battle against an enemy that might actually be worthy of respect. Long-range sensors showed over 300 Andromedan vessels approaching the Sol system in perfect formation, their ships unlike anything in human databases, sleek, predatory designs that seemed to flow and shift even as they moved through space. Captain, we're receiving communication attempts from the lead Andromedan vessel, announced Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communication station. The signal is unusual. Sarah looked at the young officer, noting the confusion in his voice. Unusual how? Ma'am, they're broadcasting in perfect Mandarin Chinese. Not translated, actual native-level fluency, including regional dialect variations and cultural references that would be impossible for an alien species to have learned through casual contact. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Human intelligence had found no evidence that the Andromedans had ever made peaceful contact with Earth, yet they were speaking human languages with the fluency of natives. Put them through. The main screen shifted to show what appeared to be a human woman in her 30s, with features that suggested East Asian ancestry and eyes that held depths of knowledge that seemed far older than her apparent age. When she spoke, her voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Greetings, Captain Kim. I am Strategic Coordinator Chun Wei of the Andromedan Expansion Fleet. I believe we have much to discuss before we begin killing each other. Sarah exchanged glances with her tactical officer, Commander Jackson, who was frantically running the woman's image through every human database. The results that came back made Sarah question her own sanity. According to DNA analysis from archived footage, Jackson whispered, "That's Dr. Chun Wei, the xenobiologist who disappeared during the first wave of human colony ships 300 years ago. She'd be over 350 50 years old if she were still alive. Sarah looked back at the screen, studying the woman who claimed to be from Andromeda, but appeared to be very human indeed. Strategic Coordinator Chun, you'll forgive my skepticism, but our records indicate that you're supposed to be a missing Earth scientist, not an alien invasion commander. Chun Wei smiled, and the expression carried a mixture of sadness and pride that was entirely human. Your records are correct, Captain Kim. I am Dr. Chun Wei, formerly of the Beijing Institute of Xenobiology, missing aboard the colony ship Harmony when it disappeared en route to Kepler 452b in 2387. The bridge fell silent as the implications of this revelation settled over Sarah's crew. If the woman on the screen was telling the truth, then the Andromedan invasion fleet wasn't alien at all. It was human. Dr. Chun, perhaps you could explain how a missing Earth scientist came to command an invasion fleet from another galaxy. Chun Wei's expression grew serious. Captain, the colony ship Harmony didn't disappear. It was captured by an automated defense system left behind by the species that originally inhabited the Andromeda galaxy. What we found there changed everything we thought we knew about evolution, technology, and the potential of human civilization. She gestured, and the screen split to show images of massive structures floating in the void between stars, cities the size of small moons, covered in technology that seemed to blend organic and mechanical elements into something that transcended both. The Andromedans weren't a single species, Captain. They were what happened when dozens of highly advanced civilizations chose cooperation over conquest, integration over domination. They built a society that spanned an entire galaxy, achieving technological advancement that made our wildest dreams look primitive. Sarah stared at the images, recognizing the implications immediately. You're saying that humans have been living in Andromeda for 3 centuries? Not just living, Captain, thriving. The original Andromedans left behind more than just technology when they transcended physical existence. They left behind the most comprehensive educational system in the history of the universe, designed to guide younger species toward their full potential. The screen showed more images, humans working alongside beings that defied easy classification, their bodies modified, and enhanced in ways that pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. Some had integrated cybernetic systems that allowed them to interface directly with their technology. Others had undergone biological modifications that adapted them for life in different environments. All of them carried themselves with the confidence of beings who had never learned to accept limitations. Dr. Chun, Sarah said carefully, if you've achieved this level of advancement, why are you here? Why bring a fleet to threaten Earth? Chun Wei's expression grew dark. Because we've been monitoring the galaxy we left behind, Captain, and what we've seen has horrified us. The Galactic Council's systematic genocide of innovative species, the deliberate stagnation of galactic civilization, the elimination of 12,000 civilizations whose only crime was daring to reach for something better. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You're not here to invade. You're here to liberate. We're here to do what should have been done millennia ago, Captain. The Galactic Council's reign of terror ends today, and we're offering humanity the choice to join us in building something better or to step aside while we clean up the mess that the galaxy has become. Commander Jackson leaned over to Sarah's command chair. Captain, tactical analysis shows that their ships are using technology at least 5 centuries beyond our current capabilities. If they wanted to destroy Earth, we couldn't stop them. Sarah nodded, but something about the situation bothered her. If the Andromedans were as advanced as they claimed, why were they announcing their intentions instead of simply acting? Dr. Chun, with all due respect, you could have taken control of this galaxy at any time in the past 3 centuries. Why are you asking for our cooperation now? Chun Wei smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw something like uncertainty in her expression. Because, Captain, the original Andromedans left us with one final lesson that took us 300 years to fully understand. Power without consent leads inevitably to corruption. We refuse to become the next Galactic Council, ruling through fear and overwhelming force. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. You need us to choose to join you. More than that, Captain, we need you to prove that humanity can choose cooperation over conquest when given unlimited power. The tests we've run on other species have been disappointing. Every civilization we've contacted in Andromeda eventually chose domination over cooperation when they achieved sufficient technological advancement. Sarah looked around her bridge, seeing her crew's confusion and uncertainty reflected in their faces. They had prepared for war against alien invaders, only to discover that their enemies were humans who had achieved everything that Earth had dreamed of for centuries. What exactly are you asking of us, Dr. Chun? Join us, Captain Kim. Bring humanity into the Andromedan civilization and help us transform this galaxy into what it should have been, a community of species working together to explore the universe instead of a collection of victims cowering under the rule of genocidal tyrants. Sarah felt the weight of human history pressing down on her shoulders. Everything her species had struggled for, every dream of expansion and exploration that had been crushed by the Galactic Council's restrictions, it was all being offered to her on a silver platter. But she had studied enough human history to know that power freely given often came with strings attached. Dr. Chin, what happens to the current galactic civilizations if we agree to join you? The Zephyrians, the Altarians, the hegemony of Vega. Shenwei's expression grew cold. They faced judgment for their crimes. Captain, 12,000 species have been eliminated because of their policies. Justice demands consequences. And if we refuse to join you, then you prove that humanity is just another species that will choose oppression over cooperation when given the chance. And we proceed with galactic reconstruction without your input. Sarah realized she was looking at a test that would determine not just humanity's future, but the fate of every remaining species in the galaxy. The Andromedans weren't offering partnership. They were offering humanity the chance to become willing participants in what could be the largest act of cosmic justice or cosmic genocide in galactic history. Captain, Lieutenant Rodriguez announced, we're receiving priority transmissions from Earth High Command. General Harrison is requesting immediate conference. Sarah nodded. Dr. Chun, I assume you can monitor our communications? Of course, Captain. Then you'll understand that this decision is too important for any one person to make. I need to consult with Earth's leadership. Chunwei nodded approvingly. Wisdom, Captain Kim. The original Andromedans chose their successors well. Take the time you need. Our offer will remain open. But understand that our patience is not unlimited. The galactic reconstruction will begin with or without human participation. The communication ended, leaving Sarah staring at a blank screen while her mind raced through the implications of what she had just heard. Outside the viewports of the Defiance, the Andromedan fleet waited in perfect formation, their ships patient and threatening in equal measure. Humanity had spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment of independence from galactic oppression, only to discover that true independence meant choosing between becoming galactic saviors or galactic executioners. The stars that had once seemed so welcoming now looked down on a species that would have to decide whether justice and mercy could coexist when the power to reshape civilization rested in their hands. In a few hours, humanity would make a choice that would echo through the galaxy for millennia to come. The question that remained was whether they would choose to become the species they had always dreamed of being, or the species that necessity demanded they become. The universe waited for their answer, and Sarah Kim realized that the greatest test of human character was about to begin. President Martinez stood in the emergency session of the United Earth Assembly, looking out at the faces of representatives from every human settlement in the galaxy. The vast chamber beneath the Antarctic ice sheet had been designed to house humanity's government in times of existential crisis, but none of its architects had imagined a moment quite like this one. On the main display, real-time feeds showed the Andromedan fleet holding position throughout the solar system, their advanced ships serving as a constant reminder that humanity's next words would determine the fate of galactic civilization. Dr. Chen Wei's ultimatum had given them 72 hours to decide, and now, with mere minutes remaining, the weight of 12,000 extinct species pressed down on every human in the chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, President Martinez began, her voice carrying across the assembly hall with the authority of someone who had never wanted the responsibility she now bore. We gather today not as Earth's leaders, but as the chosen representatives of every human dream that has ever reached for the stars. What we decide in the next hour will determine whether those dreams become humanity's greatest triumph or our final tragedy. She gestured to the display, where intelligence reports scrolled past in a cascade of data that painted the clearest picture yet of the choice before them. Admiral Vasquez had returned from her reconnaissance mission to the Outer Rim with information that had shaken even the most hardened military commanders. Admiral Vasquez, please brief the Assembly on your findings regarding Andromedan capabilities. Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her uniform bearing the insignia of humanity's newest rank, Admiral of the Galactic Fleet, a position that had been created just hours earlier in recognition of humanity's sudden elevation to galactic superpower status. Mr. President, fellow representatives, what we've discovered about our Andromedan cousins is both inspiring and terrifying. They possess the technological capability to remake matter at the subatomic level, manipulate space-time to allow instantaneous travel across galactic distances, and harness energy sources that could power entire civilizations for millions of years. She paused, letting the implications settle over the assembly. They have also demonstrated the restraint to use these capabilities only for construction and exploration. In 300 years of expansion throughout the Andromeda Galaxy, they have not destroyed a single world or eliminated a single species. Instead, they have elevated every civilization they've encountered to unprecedented levels of technological and social advancement. Representative Chun from New Beijing raised his hand. Admiral, you say they haven't destroyed any species in Andromeda, but they're threatening to do exactly that here in the Milky Way. Admiral Vasquez nodded grimly. That's correct, Representative Chun. The difference is that the species they're threatening to eliminate here are the same ones that have committed systematic genocide against 12,000 civilizations. From the Andromedan perspective, the current galactic order isn't a civilization worth preserving. It's a cancer that needs to be removed. President Martinez felt the temperature in the chamber drop as the full weight of humanity's decision became clear. Dr. Mitchell, please share your analysis of the Galactic Council's crimes. Dr. James Mitchell rose from his seat in the scientific advisory section, carrying a datapad that contained the most comprehensive record of systematic extermination in galactic history. His voice shook slightly as he began to speak. Fellow humans, In the past 72 hours, we have analyzed terabytes of data from captured Galactic Council facilities. What we found is evidence of the most extensive genocide in the history of the known universe. The main display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with red markers indicating the locations of destroyed civilizations. The sheer number of markers turned entire regions of space into crimson clouds of extinction. The Galactic Council has systematically eliminated any species that showed potential for rapid technological advancement, innovative thinking, or independent expansion. They have destroyed civilizations for inventing nuclear power, for developing artificial intelligence, for creating faster-than-light communication, and, in some cases, simply for asking too many questions about the nature of the universe. Representative Okafor from New Lagos stood up, her voice carrying the weight of generations of human struggle. Dr. Mitchell, are you saying that every species in the Galactic Council is complicit in these extinctions? Not every individual, Representative Okafor, but every government and every major institution. The evidence is overwhelming that genocide has been the official policy of the Galactic Council for over 50,000 years. They have built their entire civilization on the systematic murder of potential competitors. The chamber erupted in angry voices as representatives struggled to process the magnitude of the council's crimes. President Martinez called for order, but the emotional response was understandable. Every human in the chamber had grown up with stories of alien oppression, but the reality was far worse than anyone had imagined. The question before us, President Martinez continued once the chamber had quieted, is whether we have the right to serve as judge, jury, and executioner for an entire galactic civilization, regardless of their crimes. Representative Singh from New Mumbai rose to speak. Madam President, with respect, that question has already been answered by the Andromedans. They're offering us the chance to participate in galactic reconstruction, not to prevent it. The Council species will face judgment whether we join the Andromedans or not. That's exactly the point, Representative Singh. Do we choose to become willing participants in what could be the largest act of cosmic justice in galactic history? Or do we stand aside and let others make these decisions for us? Ambassador Sarah Chun, still bearing the diplomatic scars of humanity's confrontation with the Galactic Council, stepped forward to address the assembly. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had looked galactic tyranny in the eye and chosen defiance over submission. Fellow humans, I've spent 15 years in diplomatic service trying to find peaceful solutions to conflicts that were designed to be unsolvable. I've watched the Council species treat human lives as expendable resources while presenting themselves as paragons of galactic civilization. She paused, looking around the chamber at faces that reflected her own exhaustion and determination. But I've also learned that the power to remake civilization comes with the responsibility to do it correctly. The Andromedans are offering us unlimited power and unlimited opportunity, but they're also asking us to become willing participants in the elimination of entire species. Representative Thompson from New Sydney raised his hand. Ambassador Chun, are you suggesting we should protect the same species that have spent centuries oppressing us? I'm suggesting that we should be very careful about the precedent we set when we achieve ultimate power. Today we eliminate the Council species because they committed genocide. Tomorrow, what do we do about species that commit smaller crimes? Where does it end? The chamber fell silent as the philosophical weight of the decision became clear. Humanity was being asked not just to choose sides in a galactic conflict, but to help define what justice would look like when applied on a cosmic scale. President Martinez looked at the chronometer display, showing the time remaining until the Andromedan deadline. Less than an hour remained before humanity would have to give their final answer. Dr. Chun Wei asked us to prove that humanity can choose cooperation over conquest when given unlimited power, she said. But I think she's also asking us to prove that we can choose justice over revenge when given unlimited power. Representative Davis from New London stood up. Madam President, what if there's a third option? What if we propose a different solution to the Andromedans? Martinez felt a spark of hope. Elaborate, Representative Davis. The council species are guilty of systematic genocide, but that doesn't mean every individual within those species is guilty of the same crimes. What if we propose a solution that separates justice from extinction, trial, and punishment for those responsible for the genocides, reconstruction, and rehabilitation for the civilizations themselves? Admiral Vasquez looked skeptical. Representative Davis, the Andromedans have made it clear that they consider the current galactic order to be fundamentally corrupted. They may not be willing to accept partial measures. Then, we convince them, Davis replied with growing confidence. We show them that humanity's contribution to galactic reconstruction isn't just our willingness to participate in judgment, but our ability to imagine justice that doesn't require extinction. President Martinez felt something stirring in her chest. The same feeling that had driven humans to leave their caves, cross their oceans, and reach for the stars despite every obstacle the universe had placed in their path. Representative Davis, are you proposing that we negotiate with the Andromedans? I'm proposing that we do what humans have always done best, Madam President. When faced with an impossible choice between unacceptable alternatives, we create a third option that nobody else had imagined. The chamber buzzed with renewed energy as representatives began to see a path forward that didn't require them to choose between complicity in genocide and passive acceptance of decisions made by others. Ambassador Chun stepped forward again. If we're going to propose an alternative to the Andromedans, we need to be prepared to back it up with action. We need to prove that humans can administer justice fairly and effectively on a galactic scale. President Martinez nodded. Admiral Vasquez, what would we need to implement a galaxy-wide tribunal system? Significant resources, Madam President, but not beyond our capabilities, especially with Andromedan technology, to support the effort. The bigger challenge would be establishing legitimacy with species throughout the galaxy. That's where the Andromedans come in, Representative Singh observed. They have the power to enforce our decisions, but we provide the moral authority and the innovative thinking to make those decisions justly. President Martinez looked around the chamber, seeing hope replacing despair in the faces of humanity's representatives. It was a desperate plan, proposing to negotiate with beings who possessed godlike power and had already decided on a course of action. But it was also distinctly human. The refusal to accept that the only options were those presented by others, all in favor of proposing an alternative solution to the Andromedans, a galaxy-wide justice system that separates individual accountability from species extinction. Hands rose throughout the chamber in a wave of human determination that had carried their species from the caves to the stars, and now reached toward a future where justice and mercy might coexist on a cosmic scale. The final vote was unanimous. President Martinez looked at the chronometer, showing 15 minutes until the Andromedan deadline. Admiral Vasquez, please open a channel to Dr. Chun Wei. It's time to find out whether our Andromedan cousins are willing to let humans teach them something about justice. As the communication channel opened and Earth prepared to make its counteroffer to godlike beings who held the fate of the galaxy in their hands, President Martinez realized that humanity was about to attempt the most audacious negotiation in the history of the universe. They were going to try to convince their own evolutionary descendants that mercy was not weakness, that justice did not require extinction, and that the species that had once conquered their own world through cooperation and innovation could teach the universe a better way to remake civilization. The stars watched as humanity prepared to offer the galaxy something it had never seen before, a chance for redemption instead of just retribution, for transformation instead of just elimination. Whether the universe would accept that offer remained to be seen, but for the first time in 3 centuries, humans approached the negotiating table not as supplicants begging for scraps, but as equals proposing a better solution to an impossible problem. The age of human diplomacy had truly begun.